everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is my Forbes colleague, money and politics reporter Kyle Mullins. Kyle, thank you so much for joining me once again.
Always great to be here, Brittany.
Your team has the pleasure of digging into the net worths of every single Supreme Court justice, and today we are talking about Justice Samuel Alito. Before we talk numbers, do you mind giving us his backstory?
Absolutely. Let's get into it. So Justice Alito is the second oldest justice on the court. He was born in 1950 on April Fool's Day in New Jersey. His family, he was family of Italian immigrants on both sides. His mom was a teacher who became a principal, and his dad worked a variety of different jobs. He was a cryptologist during World War II. He was an English teacher, and eventually he became, this is Alito's introduction to politics, his dad became the head of legislative services at the New Jersey legislature. So that's a nonpartisan office that kind of helps and assists the legislature with various tasks. So he did very well in school, grew up middle class, and ended up going to Princeton University. And at Princeton, he ran headlong into a progressive movement that I don't think it's clear from the way he talks about it now. He didn't agree with it very much, and his sort of budding conservatism was very evident early on. He was pretty skeptical of anti-war protesters, pretty skeptical of these sort of different progressive ideas that were on the rise in the late 1960s, early 1970s. And so he also showed an interest in law at this point. He joked in his yearbook autobiography, his senior year at Princeton, that he wanted to one day warm a seat on the Supreme Court. I'd say he's doing a little more than warming it now. But that interest in law sent him to Yale Law School. So staying in the Ivy League there. And once he was at Yale, he did a couple months after he graduated in the Army. He did a couple months of private practice, and then he started his public sector career, which he has never left since.
It's really interesting because you and I have talked about quite a few of the justices, and some of them didn't know if they wanted to be in law. He knew that he wanted to be on the Supreme Court, and here he is. So it obviously is a journey to get to the Supreme Court. Can you talk to us about his law journey? Because like you said, he was in the public sector his whole life, or until that
Exactly.
moment.
Yeah, exactly. He was in the public sector. He has been in the public sector since that time. So he started as a prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Jersey. He says he wanted to support law enforcement. That was in the late 1970s, and then Ronald Reagan got elected in the 1980 election. 1981, Reagan comes into office, and Alito joins his administration. He joins the Office of the Solicitor General in the Justice Department, which advocates on behalf of the administration in judicial proceedings. He argued 12 times in front of the Supreme Court during that time, and he really liked some of the arguments he was making. He's talked about previously how much he enjoyed particular lines of conservative judicial action, including pro-life, taking pro-life on behalf of the administration, and anti-affirmative action positions on behalf of the administration. He then moved laterally, took a position as a deputy assistant attorney general, also in the Justice Department. And then the Bush administration, still Reagan at that point, Reagan administration appointed him as the U.S. attorney for the District of New Jersey. So kind of full circle there. He started his career as a prosecutor there, ended up getting appointed by Reagan as the U.S. attorney there. And then shortly thereafter, only a couple years later, President George H.W. Bush appointed him to a judgeship, a lifetime appointment on the Third Circuit, which is based in New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania. And he was a circuit judge for 15 years, starting in 1990 until he was appointed to the Supreme Court in 2005.
Kyle, now let's get to the moment we all have been waiting for. Let's talk some numbers. First, how much is Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito worth?
Forbes is estimating that Samuel Alito is worth $10 million, which is the second most of any of the Supreme Court justices.
Second richest Supreme Court justice. You note that he's worked in government since the 1970s. How is this adding up? How is he the second richest justice?
Absolutely. And it is a bit of a question. This is the question I was asking myself as I was doing my reporting, right? Because he was worth $2 million when he joined the Supreme Court in 2005. We know that pretty confidently. He has to declare that on his, he has to declare a net worth in his Senate paperwork. And so we know that pretty confidently. So how did he get so rich? in the past, roughly 2 decades on the Supreme Court. Obviously, he's making a good salary, but he hasn't written a book. And they have caps on the other sort of outside income they can receive. It turns out it's the oldest wealth building trick in the book, inheritance. So again, worth $2 million in 2005. In the early 2010s, his wife's father, which was her last surviving parent, passed away in 2012. Alito's mother passed away just a year later in 2013. And so between the two of them, they inherited millions of dollars from their parents. It's a little fuzzy as to exactly how much they received, but because there's a lot of limitations on the disclosures here. But Forbes reviewed probate records, and we reviewed all of his disclosures at this point, and we're very confident in saying he inherited, several $1 million at least.
You made a pie chart and easily broke this down in your reporting, and it's divided between his real estate portfolio, his investments portfolio, and his pension. So to kick off the conversation here, can you talk about his real estate portfolio first?
Absolutely. So Justice Alito owns 2 homes. He's got a $1.5 million home in Virginia. That's where he lives and where he, operates most of the time. But he and his wife also have a $1.8 million beach house in New Jersey. They bought it in 2014, so shortly after they received these big inheritances, for about $600,000. So it's tripled in value since then. And Forbes could find no record of any debt on either of these properties. So it seems like they bought them with cash at the time. So that's a pretty sizable real estate portfolio between the two homes.
And how much of his wealth is liquid?
He's got about half of his wealth, about $5 million, Forbes is estimating, in liquid assets. And that's, that runs the gamut. He's got stocks, he's got bonds, he's got mutual funds, index funds, all of those different types of things. And his liquid portfolio, which I should note, he inherited lots and lots of these assets from his, either his in-laws or his parents. But he kept a lot of it invested. Either he did buy that beach house, which has done very well and built him a lot of home equity. But other than that, they kept a lot of it invested, and it's continued to grow. The stock market's done very well over the past 10 years or so. So that's a big reason of why about half of his wealth is in that. And there's one other key thing I should note on his liquid assets, which is he is almost unique in the justices in that he owns a lot of individual shares of stock. Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice, he owns 2. He has 2 holdings of individual companies' stocks, and he's been selling them off over the years. And Justice Alito has 29 different companies that he holds individual shares of stock in. And this has led to a number of issues over the years. When you hold individual stocks as opposed to, say, mutual funds or index funds or these other kinds of things, it leads to more direct conflicts of interest, because if one of those companies is the party to a suit that they are taking up in the Supreme Court, he has to recuse himself. And so Alito is actually somewhat frequently recusing himself from decisions that the Supreme Court is making because he owns shares in companies that are party to those lawsuits.
Are there any big named companies that he owns shares to? What can you tell us there?
Yeah, so we know the companies that he owns shares in, and just to name a couple that have been in the news lately, Anheuser Busch, which is actually a company he bought. He didn't inherit those stocks. He bought that as recently as 2022. Boeing, Raytheon, but it's a lot of blue chip stocks, stuff that you would expect to find in anyone's portfolio. It seems like most of them came from his father-in-law, and he had a pretty solid, mix of investments. But I would say it's particularly heavy on the energy industry and like big, bulk, durable manufacturing.
Kyle, this has come up every single conversation you and I have had regarding the Supreme Court justices, and that is their very generous pension. Once you hit 65, you get it. He is in his 70s. Tell us how much his pension is worth.
Yeah, Justice Alito, we're estimating his pension is worth about $1.7 million. So just like all of the other justices who have these pensions who are over 65, we count that pension as one of their assets. And the reason why we do that is that the second they retire, they will be eligible for that pension, and that pension will pay out their annual salary for the rest of their life. So Justice Alito's is actually worth a little bit less than, say, Justice Sotomayor's, which we're estimating is worth over $2 million. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is that women have a longer life expectancy than men. So Justice Sotomayor's pension is worth a little bit more because she's expected to live longer. And the other thing is Alito is a little bit older. Like I said, he's the second oldest justice. So he has, a very generous pension, but it'll actually decline in value over time as he gets older and the longer he stays on the court.
There have been ethical concerns for multiple of the justices over them receiving gifts. And in your report, you note that Alito is no exception. What can you tell us there?
Right. So, Brittany, you and I have talked a little bit about already how his stock portfolio has led him to recuse himself from various cases over the years. But I think there's two other examples of ethical issues that I should bring up. The first is his wife inherited a plot of land in Grady County, Oklahoma, when her father died. And as recently as 2022, she had leased it to an energy company out in Oklahoma. And in addition to receiving some rent from that transaction, the Alitos would also receive 3/16 of any oil, gas, other mineral revenues that they could receive from that land that the energy company managed to pull out of the ground. Now, there's no evidence as of right now that they've actually managed to pull anything out of the ground, thinking fossil fuels specifically, but there were some questions raised because just 3 days after she had leased the land, Alito voted with his conservative colleagues to strike down EPA efforts to regulate greenhouse gases. So you've got, on the one hand, the Alitos are literally leasing their land to explore for greenhouse gases. On the other hand, he's regulating EPA. He is striking down EPA regulations that are trying to regulate greenhouse gases. So that's item one. Item two is in ProPublica reported that in 2008, Alito took a glitzy vacation with hedge fund billionaire Paul Singer. And Paul Singer's companies later had cases before the Supreme Court that Alito did not recuse himself from. The weirdest part, that kind of sounds like some of the Clarence Thomas stories that we've heard, but the weird thing about that was that Alito actually took to the Wall Street Journal opinion page and defended himself in an op-ed. And he argued that his relationship with Paul Singer was not close enough to merit recusal from various cases over the years. He was a kind of a distant friend that he kind of knew, but wasn't anyone close enough that would actually merit recusal. But he also made some questionable assertions, like the idea that the seat on Paul Singer's private jet that took them to the glitzy vacation would have been empty anyway. So it wasn't really a big deal that he accepted that as a gift. I think that would be a problem for me, accepting a gift from a billionaire in this kind of situation, somebody who covers rich people and the rich and powerful here at Forbes. So we'll leave that to the Supreme Court to decide how they want to enforce their ethics code going forward. But regardless, so that pretty much sums up the stuff that's been reported about Alito.
Kyle, I want to thank you so much for your reporting on all of the justices' net worths. This was your last one. I really am going to miss our conversations. I know you'll be back because you are covering money in politics and it is an election year. Kyle Mullins, thanks so much for joining me.
There's always plenty to write about in money in politics. Thanks, Brittany. Always great to be here.